All right, welcome back to Hammer and Heels, Simply Trade Tips. I'm here with my buddy, Julie Parks.
Hey,
We are
Renee.
literally, how are you doing, Jewel?
I'm
I gotta
good.
ask you that first.
It's all
Good.
good.
I always,
Yeah.
I always like to see how you're doing. So we are on series 6. We have 4 episodes in this series, and we've completed 1. So now we're on episode 2.
Mhm.
And as usual, we're going to give you some bite-sized, insightful segments, short time, with a FIO. Figure it out. Sounds like people are starting to get the FIO, Jules.
I love it.
So, yeah. What are we talking about today?
Hey, so I think today's episode is something that makes or breaks trade programs. I think it's nothing to do with HTS codes and value and things like that. I think it's the details of the org structure. So we laid out in episode 1 kind of the thread of the org structures. Now we're going to kind of talk through kind of some key components where why does budget, executive sponsor, and conflict of interests matter? What do you
Okay, awesome. So, yeah, we're going to talk about who owns the budget, who's your executive sponsor, and how do you design decision making so you don't have these conflicts of
think?
interest, so that we don't have what we call, Jewel, a compliance civil war.
Right. I like it. I like it. All right. So maybe, Renee, we kind of hop into kind of why the org structure matters. So we see this all the time. A trade leader has the expertise, the plan, the urgency, but the org structure kind of makes the execution impossible.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, how do we make sure the trade leader, to your point, knows who pays, who approves, and who gets blamed if something's wrong? So the
Right.
trade leader has to be aware of these 3 points.
Right. And if you can't answer the questions, that trade leader needs to FIO. And when you do FIO and find out all these things before there's a significant issue, you have friends in the process, right? So going it alone is never a good idea because whatever you do will not be sustained. So I think, Renee, maybe let's hop into a little more detail on who holds the budget.
Yeah. So let's start with budget ownership. And then it's very common in customs, and you and I've experienced this,
Mhm.
that leadership does not, the customs leadership does not hold the budget.
Right, which means the pitch changes completely. So if you own the budget, you're deciding between priorities. If you don't own the budget, you're asking someone else to fund the understanding of your matter or the resolving of your identified risk.
Yeah. And the hard truth is, if you don't own the budget and you have projects that you want to get done and you're not the budget owner, you may be getting a no from the budget owner,
Right.
even
Right.
if it's the right thing to do, because they have different priorities.
Yeah, and I think that's right. They don't understand the risk and is thinking, is this really required? Is this urgent? What happens if we don't do it? And essentially, maybe they can't fund it and get their other committed goals done because if you're reporting through a non-trade leader, chances are they have many different competing priorities. And let's face it, not a lot of these leadership grew up in the trade environment, so they don't know some of the risks and rewards that we get when we do focus on these things. So
I think they're starting to figure it out now
I think so. I don't know.
in this environment,
In this
right?
environment.
So, what are some common homes for the trade budget? We see it in, obviously, sometimes it can be in the trade team. That's our best case scenario.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
can move fast, but you may have import export discipline change. Export might take it, then import might take it. And Julie and I think we've both worked in
Mhm.
this environment, which we
Okay.
love.
Huh,
You
we
could be in supply chain or logistics.
Mhm.
They want speed and cost savings, a little bit of conflict of interest, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Finance, budget, very return on investment driven.
Mhm.
You've got to make sure that your ROI, your return on investment, is, you can prove it, right?
Mhm.
Which we need to do anyway. IT budget feasible if it's framed as systems modernization, and then legal compliance. This happens too. This is actually a good place to be, I think, but enforcement risk is high. That's typically when you're in that area, but I like it in general myself.
Right. And I think what's important to note is that every function has their own key cares. And when you pitch to whomever that functional owner is, you need to make sure that your strategy, kind of your going in position, matches the key concerns of the owner, you have a better chance of saying yes. So if it's finance, you're leading with the dollars recovered, the penalties avoided, the outcomes, the risk. If it's supply chain, you're kind of leading with the cycle time, predictability, fewer holds, that type of thing. And if it's kind of in the IT area, you're leading with integration, security, and quality.
You're giving them, making sure they get their what they need, huh?
Mhm. Exactly. Or you don't, or the answer is no, you know?
Yeah, right. You got to make sure they feel like they're getting something. That's just the way it works, huh, Jules? All
Um,
right. So let's talk about our second topic, executive sponsor.
yeah.
Your sponsor determines how influential you are, or maybe not. And it may not be your you may not directly report to the
Mhm.
sponsor, especially if you're decentralized. In some matrix, you may not report. It would be your boss in general if you're in a central organization. And if you want to go back to our episode 1, we described these 3 types, right?
Mhm.
Um, so teams typically sit under CFO,
Mhm.
Chief Financial Officer, Chief Operating Officer, General Counsel slash legal,
Mhm.
supply chain leadership, and risk and compliance, which is kind of what we talked about just a second ago as far
Mhm.
as um, your budget. It's very similar, right?
Right. And kind of each sponsor comes with a different lever that they have the authority to pull. So I think we want to talk a little bit about how does the executive sponsor relate to your boss. So maybe Renee, you have some examples.
Yeah. So a chief operating officer sponsor can clear roadblocks fast, but they prioritize speed. A chief financial officer can fund the projects, which I kind of like that. I
Mhm.
worked for a couple CFOs,
I enjoyed that.
but demands, but demands, like we said, ROI, return on investment. General counsel can enforce your controls, but that may increase friction
Mhm.
through the different teams. And then chief compliance or risk, drives governance and protects your independence. So, and our actually the chief compliance officer, typically it's kind of nice there because trade is obviously part of compliance. So you kind of
Mhm.
have a direct line in your role, I think.
Yeah, and I would say too, depending on who your direct boss is, you might want to find that other party to pull on. So, like if you are reporting through logistics and supply chain, for example, you should be finding a sponsor in legal, I think, because the two together make one whole trade compliance project work, right? And
Yes.
I think that also gives you the more that you create that secondary relationship or the multiple primary relationships that you need, I think that you have more of a chance of getting your things funded because one will have a circle of influence that the other doesn't have. So I think that aspect of having difficult discussions with your sponsor is less of a supporter piece and more of a real sponsor might be necessary. So when we talk a little bit about sponsor, what we mean is that group, that person that is going to truly clear the roadblocks for you. A sponsor does things, not coaches you on keep going, Julie, keep going, Renee. There are people that will actually remove the roadblock for you, have the discussion with their peers to kind of remove whatever roadblocks you might be having. So again, a sponsor may not be your direct report. It's probably likely that it shouldn't be. And I'll also say too, if you report through legal, you do want to find that sponsor in supply chain so that you have
Fine.
those opposing people.
Yeah, or finance. And let me ask you this, is a mentoring program a good way to go about finding a sponsor to clear roadblocks? I mean,
I
I know
think
that's a personal
it's
relationship,
yes.
but
Mhm.
can you use that a little bit if you say, "Hey, chief financial officer,
Yeah,
can you be my mentor?" And then, is that an option
yeah.
to
I think that
seek
both you
out?
and I have had success in those spaces where you
Yeah.
kinda make a friend. Again, the friend needs to be at the right level. So don't just go into the middle of the legal organization to try to find a mentor. You wanna be strategic on how you're pulling your mentor and to try to make sure that it aligns with, what where you wanna go, where you wanna take the organization. So the right
Yeah.
level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. All right, good, awesome points,
Mhm.
Jules. Okay,
Mhm.
next, how do we're back, we're in our third
Mhm.
topic of this episode, which is how do you avoid conflicts of interest?
Mhm. Yeah, so trade sits right in the middle of competing goals, as we mentioned. Supply chain wants to move the goods, reduce cost, and sometimes they want the lowest duty rate. Legal wants everything 100% compliant, no matter the cost, and zero risk. Finance wants the savings and clean forecasting. Like, oh my gosh, the crystal ball with tariffs has been interesting, and the business kind of wanted it all yesterday. Um, so, Renee, what are
Yeah.
your thoughts on this?
None of these are wrong, but without governance, the loudest function and monetary savings. I mean, you always used to tell me follow the money
Follow the
when we
money.
were
Yeah,
talking about things, right?
yeah.
Uh, Following the money wins, but that's not always the correct choice.
Right, right. So maybe let's get into, so now you understand kind of what we're talking about. Now let's get into how conflict proofing, what that would look like.
So it's building the right decisions and escalation paths. That's what we're
Mhm,
trying to say. So to
mhm,
avoid conflicts, you got to build decisions and escalation paths. So, like for example, across functional council, this is my favorite.
mhm.
I love this having
Yeah,
a council. In fact, we overdid it, I think, at our last job, but
we yeah.
but hey, we were good at that. We had this committee, that committee, this council,
Okay.
but it really we did get a lot done through the council.
Mhm,
A formal classification governance process, an independent review and approval of any high risk decisions. So that's cool. Like that's your escalation path to high risk decisions.
mhm,
And then, of course, a tiebreaker escalation path. Let's say everybody's conflicting about it.
mhm.
Usually, and guess what? This is where your executive sponsor comes in.
Right, right.
So you have an executive sponsor of the steering committee.
Yeah.
So maybe like you said, you've made a friend and you've asked them to be on your committee.
Hmm. I think so. So Renee's kind of highlighting some examples, and I think what we're trying to get around in more like poignant terms is that when the group that benefits is the same group that's doing the work, like the tariff classification people benefit from lower tariff rates, for example. You want to make sure that the decision, the ultimate decision, rests in another organization so that you have that conflict of interest covered because you write into your policy that the approver of the ultimate classification, if the tariff rate is over a certain amount, needs to be the compliance department, for example, to kind of bring that into light.
Yes. And then, if we don't do that, we end up with overly aggressive
Mhm.
origin claims, creative classification decisions,
Mhm.
unsupported valuation deductions,
Mhm.
which is, all of these are very problematic, as you can imagine, in trade, and compliance
Yeah.
teams being pressured to sign off without evidence.
Right. And I think we've
These
also
are
seen the opposite too, right? Where legal can freeze the business because every decision becomes a no unless there's zero risk or 100% mitigated risk.
Yeah, true that. Yeah, we're trying to find a balance. So
Mhm.
the goal isn't maximum speed or maximum caution. I love this. It's
Mhm.
controlled decision making with documented rationale.
Right.
That's what we're looking for.
Right. So, if you take one thing away from today, we know trade success is less about where the team sits and more about whether the organizational design gives you funding power, sponsor power, and conflict controls.
Awesome. I love this episode.
I do too.
So ask yourself three questions. Who holds the budget? Who's the executive sponsor? And how influential are they?
Mhm,
And what mechanisms prevent conflict driven decisions?
mhm,
So,
mhm.
what's our FIO, Jules?
Yeah, so I think that folks should take those three questions and answer them. So, who holds your budget? Who is your executive sponsor? What is their sphere of influence, right? And what
Mm.
mechanisms prevent conflict driven decisions? I think what you find is if you map that against the problems that you might be seeing in your organization, you'll quickly come up with solutions. Because if you're not the budget holder, well, there's one problem to start with. How do you solve that you're not the budget holder? You become very good at creating business cases that resonate with the budget holder itself, for example.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's good. Yeah,
Yep.
awesome. And then the sponsor, and then escalation path. So,
Mhm.
yeah, this is awesome. Thank you. Come to our Trade Geeks, please, and tell us if you did your FIO, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks,
All right.
Renee.
Thanks, Jules.
Great work.
You too.